1. Pre-Columbian period before 1519. Before the arrival of Europeans, the region now known as Mexico was home to some of the most advanced and diverse civilizations in the ancient world. These included the Olmec, often considered the mother culture of Mesoamerica, who laid the foundations for later societies through their developments in writing, calendar systems, and monumental architecture. The Zapotec and Teotihuacan cultures also flourished, with the city of Teotihuacan becoming one of the largest urban centers of the ancient world. Farther south, the Maya civilization thrived with impressive achievements in astronomy, mathematics, and writing. By the 14th century, the Aztec Empire rose to power in the Valley of Mexico. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was built on a lake and became a vast and complex city with canals, temples, and marketplaces. The Aztecs had a rich religion centered on gods like Huitzilopochtli and practiced large-scale human sacrifices. Their society was highly structured, with an emperor, nobles, priests, and commoners. This era represents a time of cultural brilliance and political complexity, laying the groundwork for much of Mexico's cultural identity today.
2. Spanish colonial period, 1519 to 1821. The Spanish colonial period in Mexico began in 1519, when Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés landed on the Gulf Coast and made his way to the heart of the Aztec Empire. By forging alliances with indigenous enemies of the Aztecs and using superior weaponry, Cortés and his men managed to capture Tenochtitlan in 1521, bringing an end to Aztec rule. Mexico was soon declared part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, and for the next 300 years, it remained under Spanish control. During this time, the Spanish imposed their language, religion, and social structures on the indigenous population. Catholicism became the dominant religion, with churches, missions, and monasteries built across the territory. A strict social hierarchy developed, favoring Spaniards born in Europe, peninsulas, over Creoles, Spaniards born in the Americas, mestizos, and indigenous peoples. The Spanish also exploited Mexico's rich natural resources, especially silver, which helped finance the Spanish Empire. However, colonization also brought devastation, forced labor, new diseases, and cultural suppression led to a massive decline in the native population. Over time, discontent among the Creoles and the lower classes grew, eventually fueling the independence movement in the early 19th century.
3. Independence in the First Mexican Empire, 1821 to 1824. After more than 300 years of Spanish colonial rule, Mexico's fight for independence began in 1810, when Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, a Catholic priest, issued the famous call to arms known as El Grito de Dolores. His cry inspired thousands of people, especially peasants and indigenous communities, to rise up against Spanish oppression. Although Hidalgo was captured and executed in 1811, the movement continued under leaders like José María Morelos and later Vicente Guerrero. After more than a decade of bloody conflict, independence was finally achieved in 1821 through a coalition between insurgent leaders and conservative elites. The key figure in this final phase was Agustín de Iturbide, a former royalist who negotiated with rebels to proclaim the Plan of Iguala, ensuring Mexico's independence while preserving Catholicism and social hierarchy. In 1822, Iturbide declared himself Emperor of Mexico, establishing the First Mexican Empire. However, his rule was short-lived. The empire faced internal opposition, political instability, and financial problems. By 1823, Iturbide was forced to abdicate, and Mexico transitioned to a republic the following year. Though brief, this period was crucial in establishing Mexico's sovereignty and national identity. 4. The Republic and Political Instability, 1824 to 1876. Following the collapse of the First Mexican Empire, Mexico was declared a republic in 1824, adopting its first federal constitution. However, the early Republican period was marked by severe political instability. Power shifted constantly between liberal and conservative factions, each with very different visions for the country's future. Coups, assassinations, and short-lived presidencies became common. One of the most devastating events during this time was the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. As a result of the war, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico was forced to cede nearly half of its territory to the United States, including present-day California, Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. This loss was a huge blow to national pride and political unity. In the 1860s, Mexico faced another crisis when France invaded and installed Maximilian I as emperor during the brief Second Mexican Empire, 1864 to 1867. However, resistance led by Benito Juárez, a liberal indigenous leader, eventually restored the republic. Juárez's return marked a temporary victory for liberalism, but the country remained fragile, with deep divisions and a weak economy. This era set the stage for the long dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz that would follow.
5. Porfiriato and the Mexican Revolution, 1876 to 1940. In 1876, Porfirio Diaz, a military general, seized power and ruled Mexico almost continuously for over 3 decades, a period known as the Porfiriato. Under Diaz, Mexico experienced rapid modernization, railroads expanded, foreign investment increased, and cities grew. The economy flourished for the elite, but the benefits were not shared equally. Rural peasants and indigenous communities lost their lands, laborers were exploited, and political freedoms were severely restricted. This inequality and authoritarian rule eventually sparked the Mexican Revolution, which began in 1910. Revolutionary leaders like Francisco Madero, Emiliano Zapata, Pancho Villa, and Venustiano Carranza fought for democracy, land reform, and workers' rights. The revolution was long and violent, lasting a full decade and costing the lives of around 1 million people. By 1917, a new Mexican constitution was enacted, introducing landmark reforms including land redistribution, labor rights, and restrictions on church power. Although fighting continued in some regions, the revolution gradually gave way to political rebuilding. In the 1920s and 1930s, the government began consolidating power under a new political structure, eventually leading to the creation of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI, which would dominate Mexican politics for most of the 20th century. 6. The Modern Era, 1940-present. Beginning in the 1940s, Mexico entered a period of rapid industrialization and urbanization, often referred to as the Mexican Miracle. The government, dominated by the Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI, invested in infrastructure, education, and manufacturing, leading to strong economic growth and increased national pride. However, this development mainly benefited urban elites, while poverty and inequality persisted in rural areas. By the 1960s and 70s, economic problems and social unrest began to surface. Events like the Tlatelolco massacre in 1968, where government forces killed student protesters, exposed the authoritarian nature of the PRI regime. In the 1980s, Mexico faced a severe debt crisis, and in response, the government adopted neoliberal reforms, privatizing state industries and opening markets to foreign trade. In 2000, Mexico experienced a major political shift when the PRI lost the presidency for the first time in over 70 years. Since then, the country has developed a more pluralistic democracy, although challenges remain. Drug-related violence, corruption, economic inequality, and migration continue to affect national stability. Despite these issues, Mexico today is a leading Latin American power with a vibrant culture, growing economy, and an evolving political landscape.